Thank you very much, Amitoj, and wonderful to be with all of you at Blockchain Week today. And as Amitoj said, I am a techie at heart. I started my professional writing code, of course, because I'm a very old person now. The code I was writing was in Fortran, not Python. So I'll date myself with that statement. But I have always been a techie at heart and always been looking for ways in which we can take the latest technologies and make sure that they become useful for India and for all of India. Now, before I get into Web3 and blockchain and all of that, let me ask you the following question. How many of you have enrolled and are using DigiYatra? DigiYatra. You all are using DigiYatra, terrific. Do you like it or not? So I developed DigiYatra. When I was the aviation minister, I developed DigiYatra. And I developed it because that was a classic example of where we could use underlying technologies like facial recognition and so on to make it an application that would be convenient and helpful to all Indians and would enable us to make our airports a lot more efficient and make your life a lot more convenient. So DigiYatra or UPI or Aadhaar are all examples of where we can take technologies and really apply them, find use cases that work for Indians, that are regulated, that are safe, and that can really, really put India at the cutting edge. So for me, it's always very, very exciting to use DigiYatra. I was just going through Bangalore Terminal 2, and that terminal is very much at the digital frontier, and we've pushed the envelope. We pushed the envelope in what's possible in India today. Now, I tell that story, friends, because I want you to do the same thing for Web3. Web3, to my mind, again, I speak as a techie and as a former venture capitalist, has enormous potential. It is an underlying technology that can be a game changer for many use cases. But the challenge is that you all have to find those applications like we found UPI, like we found DigiYatra, and make it possible to use it safely. And that's really the challenge. Now, whenever we talk about Web3 or blockchain, everybody talks about crypto. Crypto, as you know, has a very, shall we say, checkered reputation. And everything that's just happened with SBF, what has happened with Binance, has not really enabled us to see how crypto can truly be a safe technology that can be used by the public. So we have to be super, super careful, particularly in India. And this is something you all need to understand. Particularly in India where we have capital controls. When you can't freely trade the rupee, for us to enable crypto assets is not really feasible. Unlike other economies like Singapore or Korea or the US that have freely tradable currencies and can get into crypto with a lot less trepidation. As far as India is concerned, we have to be very, very careful, very, very cautious when we talk about crypto. But crypto, friends, is just one use case for what is a revolutionary set of technologies that underlie Web3. And so, we have to find the applications that will enable Web3 to really take off for India. And Amitoj, if you will just allow me 1 more minute. I'll just explain how policy making and law making happens.
I was getting to that only right now.
On these technologies that can make a very big difference, which is we are very cautious. We see what applications and use cases are bubbling up amongst the public, amongst developers such as yourselves. Then we engage in a series of dialogues with developers, with companies. We begin to understand which are the use cases that can be scaled up without trouble. Then the policy making starts. And then the policy making is implemented in 3 different ways. One, you just have a series of statements by the concerned ministry that says, this is the way to do it. And that is literally just passing an order. Second is rule making, and the rule making is done by regulators. So when regulators do rule making, They have to go through a consultation process. They have to issue their regulations in the public domain. That's debated, that's discussed.
So if I may at this point.
And then finally there's lawmaking. So there's orders, there's rulemaking, and then there's lawmaking. And each one of them takes much, different techniques, different ways of doing it.
So again, apologies for interjecting, but because there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding or misperceptions out there that someone like you, as a standing committee on finances chair, is basically the boss of legislation. That if crypto has to be legislated through, let's say, a draft bill or a crypto bill that enters parliament, which in 2021 was happening, and you, in fact, had also commented on the fact that that might come soon. Obviously, it was paused, and we'll get into that in a bit. So can you clarify for everyone why you're not the boss of crypto legislation?
No, it doesn't work that way. So again, the big picture, Amitoj, in terms of how policy making is done, as I said, policy making can be done in one of three ways. Simply by an order that a ministry passes, and if they have delegated powers for that particular area, they can just pass an order. They can just issue a notification, and that notification can go into the Gazette of India, or it can just be a circular that comes out. RBI does circulars all the time. And that becomes then the way in which that activity is conducted. Then there's rule making, where again, given delegated powers to regulators, and the regulators can be the Reserve Bank of India, which has rule making in its domain, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, that has rule making within its domain. So they can issue rules, and those rules, as I said, have to be put up for public consultation. There's discussion, there are working groups that are involved before that rulemaking happens. And then that rulemaking happens, it's issued formally, and that becomes, in a way, the law of the land. Then there is legislation. Legislation is a lot more complicated, because what we have to do is we have to draft the law itself. That's done by the ministry. The ministry drafts the law. The law then comes to Parliament, and it comes to my committee if it's a financial sector legislation. Then we review that legislation. We have public hearings. We get inputs from all of you. We hear what it is. We propose amendments to the ministry. The ministry then reflects on the amendments, makes changes to the legislation, then introduces that legislation. So legislation, which effectively will be required for crypto assets because it's such a new area and it touches on so many different things, that process of legislation can take years, and it does take years. So for example, we just redid all the competition laws in India, with very, very major piece of work that we did last year, which is redoing competition law in India. That competition law was changed after 15 years. After 15 years. So lawmaking is an infrequent activity. It happens after years, sometimes after decades, because it's such an elaborate process. But the rule making that regulators do, that Reserve Bank of India does, or Securities and Exchange Board of India does, that is something that happens much more regularly, can happen every year also.
So I guess, for the folks in the Web3 world, they look at the rest of the world, they look at, let's say, Europe, they look at UK, they look at Japan. These three jurisdictions have said, well, there's a lot that's innovating right now, there are a lot of new developments, but we're going to come up with some form of legislation. And so it's kind of natural for folks outside of New Delhi's parliamentary process to ask, why can't India do that? So can you answer that?
That's a great question, Amitoj. So as I said right at the outset, because we have capital controls, we are a lot more prudent, a lot more careful about crypto assets, not necessarily about Web3 or blockchain, but certainly about crypto assets. We have to be a lot more careful because we have capital controls, and all the other jurisdictions that you mentioned don't have capital controls. So we are different from them in the first instance. Second, as the Honorable Finance Minister has said very often, we have to wait for global standards to develop on some of this before we figure out which of those global standards we can then implement in India. And again, because legislation and new areas take a long time, to develop, we still don't have formal legislation that's come through at a global level in these open economies yet. They themselves are going through their own legislative process. Once their legislative process is concluded, then certain global standards will get created for, let's say, OECD countries, which tend to have open economies. Once global standards have been created for the OECD economies, then we in India can see what is it of those global standards that we can then begin to implement. So that whole process is underway right now. As you know, in the G20 discussions this time in the Delhi declaration, there was in the finance track a lot of discussion on crypto assets, and it was decided that this whole process would continue in terms of global standards development. But in the meanwhile, every jurisdiction would be free to set its own course. And that's effectively what we are following right now.
He's talking about the International Monetary Fund and Financial Stability Board synthesis paper, which India initiated, by the way. And India has really put its mark on crypto policy globally for that reason. CoinDesk ran a most influential list recently, and the finance minister was on that for that reason. I guess, there are several questions out here that a lot of people would like to ask. And personally, I want to just dive a little deeper into what you said, that this is a legislative process. There are other things that we have to look at. I like what you said about global standards and how they get adopted. Because the consensus paper, which is basically the rules, global rules that everyone have agreed on, was that, okay, we've framed the rules. Now we'll ask the Financial Stability Board to kind of get everyone to implement them, all right? But that should not stop a lot of the leading nations of the world economically to go ahead and still frame a legislation, right? So I know that we have got capital controls. We've known that for 3 years now. So I guess my question is, with elections, this thing that's coming up in a few months, your role could change. You could be in a higher position. Personally speaking, would you advocate for crypto legislation? And if you would, crypto, and I mean crypto, Web3, blockchain, the whole thing, would you legislate that? Would you make it go through Parliament personally? And if you would, what's the time frame for that?
So Amitoj, let me make 3 points on that. First, as I said, I'm a techie at heart, and I believe in Web3, and I think Web3 has enormous potential for India. But point number 1, I want to see the use cases that the industry brings forward. And I've been asking the industry, many of you have heard me on this before also. I'm a bit of a broken record on this, which is whether it is Web3 or whether it's crypto, bring for us the use cases that will really, really be powerful for India. So that's point 1, I want to first see the use cases. Point 2, I want to see how the global standards evolve. Because we are seeing that these are still being shaped right now. It may still take some time. 24 is going to be the year of elections around the world. Many important countries, whether it's the US, the UK, India, are going in for elections. So I'm not sure in 24 the standards will develop. So point number 2 is we've got to wait and see how global standards develop. And point number 3 is that we have to still see what's going to emerge from the meltdown. So we've had a crypto meltdown, folks. I know you've been following the news much more closely than I have. But we've had a crypto meltdown, whether it is SPF, whether it is what's happening with Binance. There is a real question about whether some of these companies are going to survive, whether they're going to be put out of business because of their violation of all kinds of rules and regulations and laws. So we've got to see what industry emerges after this meltdown. So all of those 3 reasons are why, as I said, number 1, use cases, number 2, global standards, number 3, industry evolution. These are all reasons why any policymaker is going to be cautious about where crypto is right now. And I'll give you the example of Christine Lagarde, who, as you know, is the president of the European Central Bank, and she told the story about her son. I don't know if you saw that. And her son didn't listen to her, put a lot of money into crypto, and he lost all of it. And as a mother and as a regulator now, she says, I'm appropriately careful about how this whole industry is evolving. So there are a lot of bad experiences, a lot of train wrecks out there. And as regulators and policymakers that are responsible, not just on the innovation side, which of course we want to encourage, but also on the safety side, we have to really find that balance, Amitoj, and that balance is going to evolve over the next 12 to 18 months, I think.
So, I want to give you a counterexample. You look at counterfactuals as a politician, and we as journalists also look at counterfactuals. And Kristina Georgieva, who is the IMF's head, she sat in India during the G20, during a private Chatham House crypto conversation. And we found that out from sources, and we made it very clear that we're not revealing our source, and we wrote about it also, CoinDesk. And for those of you who don't know CoinDesk, we're the ones who, in a way, kind of brought down FTX because we broke that story. She said something quite different. And this is in response to the RBI's position that when the RBI was sitting on the stage and basically saying, well, we should ban it. And she said, hold on, can you ban it? It's not effective. And that's the reason why legislation needs to come through. I mean, you can comment on that, but I mean, we know India's position on that and the reason you already mentioned. I guess the question...
I'd just be repeating
myself.
Sure.
Yeah, you'll be repeating yourself. So I want to get into something else. Why are they, okay, in the US, for example, there's so many politicians from both sides of the aisle who may have their personal agendas to come up with different types of crypto legislation, stable coins, Web3, blah, blah, blah. Why is it that we're not seeing that from India's parliament? Why are more people like you not coming out there? And what can the industry do to kind of bring more efforts from the parliament to kind of engage and come up with their own legislation, for example, or come up with ideas?
So Amitoj, because I chair the Standing Committee on Finance, it's obviously not appropriate for me to bring in private member legislation in my area, so that is obviously not appropriate for me. But other honorable members of parliament obviously have the right to bring up legislation and to bring forward ideas and policy innovation and so on. And some of them have engaged, some of them have spent time on it. And I know you all have engaged with them as well. And I think that's a very good thing to do. And I would very much encourage some of our leading lawmakers that are very thoughtful about these matters, some of them who are committee members of our honorable committee, to actually push the envelope on this. Because we would really value that innovation in terms of policy making if people come up with good ideas and come up with good ways in which even crypto could take off in India with the appropriate KYCs and controls and so on.
That's a big statement, by the way. We were talking about this earlier.
No, and Amitoj, just to interrupt on that, I think it's perfectly fine for the industry to also come up with, possible legislation. Wow. Why not? Of course. That is the give and take that happens between policymakers and industry continuously. And it happens in every industry, and you should do it as well. I have often said to all of you, please put the white papers together, show the use cases, go through where legislation or policy making is around the world, and then propose what you think would be the right policy making framework for India. That is entirely within your right as industry participants. And we are wide open to those good suggestions and good ideas. And we've done that in all industries. So we'd be very happy to encourage that or participate or learn more about your thinking in those matters.
You've mentioned the legitimate concerns of both the Central Bank of India, the Finance Ministry, the government, as to why we can't let crypto run wild, let's say. But is there a world in which, let's say, there is something that this industry can actually look at and be like, yeah, okay, we can kind of still exist and flourish even. Is there a world that you can paint for us?
We have no choice. We have to flourish, Amitoj. And again, I'm not talking about crypto. I'm talking about Web3 and blockchain and all of these underlying technologies. AI, ML is getting wrapped up in that. This is the cutting edge as far as technology is concerned. And we've shown in India tremendous ability to build the India stack, to build a digital public infrastructure. And we're looking to you all, friends. We're looking to all of you for innovation in this regard. You have to show us the way. You have to tell us that this is how this can happen. And that responsibility is really on you. Our job then is to work with you to shepherd this forward.
Are you seeing that happen right now?
No, and that is exactly what I'm requesting you all to do. And I've been saying for some time now, which is the industry needs to get together. The industry needs to put forward the white papers, put forward the thought proposals as to how this can evolve and take off.
So I consider myself a journalist and a cynical optimist. So I'll ask one question. Is it a kind of Trojan horse where you're saying, well, crypto policy, you guys need to come up with, the white paper, blah, 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 because it's no longer a priority for the government, because there's so many other things. And let's say you mentioned AI. Is AI a greater priority for legislation for the Indian government now, for you, for, your circles, than crypto was, let's say, a year back?
There are many different technologies that are evolving right now, all of which are of great importance for India And if they have great importance for India, they will naturally be of importance for our policy-making priorities as well. You mentioned some of them. You've talked about artificial intelligence, which is extraordinarily important, and you know the risks that generative AI is posing right now. So we've got to be very mindful of that. Equally, quantum computing and what it does to cryptography. So we have to be very careful about what that's going to do. We have to be very careful about what's happening with semiconductors and the high-powered latest semiconductors and data centers and cloud computing centers that are happening. Similarly, we have to worry about various other technology areas like battery storage for climate change. So for government, at any given time, there are 10, 15 core technologies that we have to be very, very thoughtful about. Obviously, Web3 is one of those. But again, the policy making depends on the use cases and the impact that it has on the country that drives the policy making priorities. So for artificial intelligence right now, you all know how important it is and what kind of impact it can have on Indians, right? And there are 1,000 applications that are emerging for that right now. So similarly for Web3, those applications have to emerge, and then on the basis of the impact of those applications, the priorities will get set.
No, I always ask this question to anyone I'm interviewing. If there's one thing that you really want to stress on, and you kind of stressed on it, so if you want to repeat the same thing, that's fine. But like, what would you say to this audience? Like, hey guys, this is what you're doing wrong. You know, what's that?
All I would say is go out and innovate. Go out and innovate. We have so many fantastic examples of innovation in India. Obviously, UPI, Aadhaar, what's happening. Charging networks are developing in India. There's incredible innovation happening in charging networks in electric vehicles right now. So go out and innovate. Make really fabulous things happen with Web3, and I'm sure they will. And as soon as those fabulous use cases emerge, you'll find that there'll be tremendous priority setting and tremendous interest in all of this.
So, final question. We've not talked about digital rupee, CBDC, and how RBI is thinking about that. What are you hearing? Can you lay out a picture for us how that, I mean, everyone is hearing from the legislative or RBI circles that we're good with CBDC, wholesale or retail. And as long as you're doing that and not crypto, it's fine. Can you expand on that a little bit?
So the RBI has set up their innovation sandboxes for CBDC. Some of you might have, through your bank, been even invited. I have, just as a consumer, to participate in CBDC. And that's exactly the right approach that RBI is following, which is to set up these sandboxes to see how people adopt it, what they adopt it for, how safe those applications are. And obviously, as the volumes and the transactions grow in CBDC, then we know where to take that from a policy-making point of view. But I'll once again reiterate that as far as technology and its impact is concerned, it's emergent. It's emergent. It really depends on how things evolve. It's not a question of top-down direction setting. It really is a question of bottoms-up emergent behavior around where the big use cases are. Take UPI. Who would have thought that UPI would become as pervasive as it has? That people would find it so easy to use? That is an emergent phenomena that has blown all of us away. I'm very happy, for example, on DigiYatra as well, that the usage has been growing so quickly and the emergent behavior around it has been so positive. So it's exactly the same thing we need to do for Web3 also, is we have to put those use cases to work, we have to see what the emergent behavior is, and then we can set appropriate policy around it.
Yeah, it's ubiquitous, no question. Just one final thing, because we heard this yesterday in a conversation with another very senior politician in Bangalore, actually. It's only open to banks, that innovation hub that the RBI has created. It's not open to the folks out here. Should it be?
If you have good ideas and good proposals, please reach out either to me in my role as chair of the Standing Committee of Finance, or alternatively to the concerned officials at the Reserve Bank of India. We'll make sure that your good innovation and your good ideas are given ample opportunity to be explored and to be tested. So that's our sort of guarantee. We want innovation to flourish. Obviously, we want to do it in a thoughtful, prudent manner. But please, by all means, everybody has my email ID. It's jsinha21@gmail.com, jsinha21@gmail.com. Anybody who has any good idea, wants to speak to the regulators, wants to test their ideas, you're very welcome to write to me, and I'll make sure that your voice is heard and your ideas are explored. Thank you very much.